No kidding. The endocrine system is going to be the hardest chapter that you guys study in anatomy and physiology. It's just hard. It is because the endocrine system is so vital to our body. So in this video, it's going to be long. There's going to be a little small intro to the endocrine system on this slide. We're going to talk about exocrine versus endocrine glands. We're going to talk about lipid versus water-soluble hormones, how hormones affect their target cells. This is how long it's going to be. That's why I'm giving you the list. What is a stimulus for hormone release, and hormone level homeostasis, which is usually done through negative feedback. So this is going to be a long video. I like to do shorter videos, but you can always pause it. So I'll be pausing a lot probably throughout recording this. First of all, if this YouTube video, I'm not going to click on it here, but if you want to see what it is, just Google a threat from Gary Busey. It goes right to the heart of the fact that it's impossible to do what his threat is. But here's the endocrine system right here. Oh, where is my pen? My first pause is about to occur right now. So the endocrine system is the organs don't touch each other. They're not connected like the digestive system. You have the mouth to the esophagus, or to the pharynx, to the esophagus, to the stomach. But the endocrine system doesn't have to be connected because when it secretes hormones, the hormones are going to travel through the blood. Let me find my pen. Found it, or the one that I can use to draw on this little guy here. So the endocrine system is made up of all these organs that are separated from one another. But interestingly enough, we have endocrine organs that control each other, like the hypothalamus. It's part of your brain, but it produces neurohormones. It's a neuroendocrine organ, part of the nervous system, part of the endocrine system. So when it's part of the nervous system, it's going to use its neurons to control things. But when it's part of the endocrine system, we talk about just the hormones that are actually released by the hypothalamus. But the hypothalamus can release hormones, release hormones that target the pituitary. And then the pituitary releases quite a few different types of hormones, and the pituitary can control the thyroid, and the pituitary can control the adrenal glands and the reproductive organs. And so it's going to be a complicated chapter. Nothing is connected physically, but through the blood, all things can connect, right? And so basically, the hypothalamus is going to be in charge in this chapter, unlike the nervous system, of controlling the pituitary gland. And then the pituitary gland produces so many hormones, it's sort of impossible to just summarize it like we can do for the thyroid. The thyroid basically is for metabolism. And then the thymus is basically for immunity. It helps to mature immune cells. That says immunity. Your adrenal glands are going to be for salt and sugar control in the body, and then therefore it's going to affect, well, it's going to affect a lot of things, and also can release, the adrenal glands are going to release these hormones that are like testosterone. The ovaries and the testes are for reproductive purposes, and they give us our secondary sexual characteristics. And the pancreas, as you know already, deals with glucose, blood glucose levels. The parathyroid glands, these guys right here, if you learned in the bone chapter, are going to be responsible for blood calcium regulation. Can't underestimate the importance of managing our blood calcium levels, because blood calcium is important to proper nervous system functioning, proper muscular system functioning, and also blood clotting. So the parathyroid glands are crucial to your survival. And the pineal gland is going to be, it's going to produce melatonin, the sleepy hormone. So this in a nutshell, this is way too vague, etc. But this is how we're starting this chapter, which is this introduction to the endocrine system. Now, from the first semester of anatomy and physiology, you should have learned about the difference between exocrine and endocrine glands, because we saw a lot of exocrine glands. They have ducts, and so they're going to secrete non-hormone products directly onto a surface. So if we have these cells, we're going to have this duct, and here's the surface. Now, the surface can be inside the body or outside the body. And an example of inside the body might be, this is an exocrine gland that is attached. The way I've drawn this is going to make this impossible for me to continue on. Here, let's do this. Okay. These cells down here are exocrine glands, and they are going to make something that is non-hormone, like an enzyme, a digestive enzyme, that's going to go through this duct and be put into the small intestines. Or for the sake of sweat glands, we wouldn't have this top line here. If this is a sweat gland, it's going to release sweat, and it's going to be put right onto the surface of the body. So non-hormone products, and we have ducts. Ceruminous glands, these guys secrete cerumen. Those are in your ear canal. That is cerumen is wax. Goblet cells, you know that goblet cells are all along the digestive tract and all along the respiratory tract, and they are going to be secreting mucus, because in the digestive tract, that helps move everything along. But in the respiratory tract, the great thing about goblet cells secreting mucus is because when we breathe in, and that air comes in through our pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium lining most of the respiratory tract, then those goblet cells are there to secrete mucus so it can trap the dirt and debris, and it doesn't get down into our lungs. We have pancreatic ducts, like this is what I drew up here. This is the small intestines. The pancreas has ducts in it that secrete digestive enzymes to help us digest our food. The mammary glands would secrete milk. The salivary glands, as you know, they secrete saliva directly into your mouth. And our sebaceous glands are oil glands, another one of those exocrine glands found in the skin. All right, when it comes to endocrine glands aren't like this. There is no duct. So if here's the surface of anything, it doesn't matter. If here's our endocrine gland, there is no connection anywhere. This is the endocrine gland. It makes hormones, and hormones are released from the endocrine gland directly into the interstitial fluid, that fluid surrounding cells. And nearby, there's going to be like a little capillary. And if this hormone is called hormone X, it will go into the blood and it will travel throughout the whole body. And so hormones are secreted directly into the blood, and that's how our hormones travel. Oh, also, I should mention that when we get into the cardiovascular system and we do the blood vessels, we'll find that a lot of things sneak out of our capillaries. And if fluid sneaks out of the capillaries and hormones go with it, then that fluid, excess fluid that leaks out of the capillaries and hormones and other stuff will travel through what we call the lymphatic system. So we do have hormones in lymph. Examples: thyroid hormone is going to be secreted by the thyroid, estrogen by the ovaries, growth hormone going to be causing growth, and it's by your anterior pituitary, melatonin by the pineal gland. Some students get melatonin and melanin mixed up. Melanin is a dark pigment. Melatonin is a sleepy hormone. Nowadays, so many people take melatonin, it's easy to remember that, and like adrenaline is another example. And we will not be using the term adrenaline as much as the term epinephrine. That is our adrenaline. Okay, so that's the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands. Trying to see here. I already paused for the first time. Can even make it through the first slide without a little pause. Okay, now when it comes to just some more basics of the endocrine system, endocrinology is the study of the endocrine organs and the hormones produced by those. And so an endocrinologist is someone who studies endocrinology. And we're just scratching the surface of the endocrine system. It's going to be super hard, but we're not going into major detail, believe it or not. Recall that hormones are secreted by neurons. When one neuron, here's our presynaptic neuron, wants to talk to a postsynaptic neuron, at this synapse here, we're going to release neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are the communication system for neurons. But hormones are released by endocrine organs. It's sort of important that you guys understand that when we control the human body, there are two main control systems for the human body. The nervous system controls the human body, but it does it very fast. You know, reflexes are incredibly fast reactions that occur at the spinal level. Hormones, the endocrine system, when it controls the body, it takes a little longer to set in. And one example of how fast the nervous system is compared to hormones, we're going to go into a lot of hormones that increase your blood pressure. when it comes to the nervous system, that it takes a while for that to kick in, for them to increase your blood pressure. However, if I stand up really quick, if you remember, if I stand up, then I'm going to have a carotid artery reflex where my nervous system immediately causes vasoconstriction of my carotid arteries, and that's going to maintain blood pressure to my brain. That's a very fast, immediate response. So the nervous system and the endocrine system both control our body, but the nervous system does it very fast. And the endocrine system takes a little while to click into place. So here we have a hormone. This is just one cell making a hormone. Notice how hormones travel in the blood, and then they affect cells elsewhere in the body. When it comes to this term autocrines, we actually produce, here's a cell that secretes this substance, and it comes back and affects itself, right? Autocrine. There in the immune system, we have a lot of white blood cells that secrete these things called autocrines. They secrete them, and then it stimulates them. It goes back and docks on receptors on the own cell and stimulates those individual cells. That usually occurs in the immune system. This is not a part of the endocrine system. Just knowing that some cells secrete substances that affect themselves is good to know. Please know the definition of an autocrine. Same with paracrines. These really don't fit in the category with hormones because they're not traveling through the blood. But in this case, here's one group of cells. This one population's blue, and it's secreting a substance that affects a second population of cells nearby. So paracrines, if I'm releasing it, then it will affect the people around me. And a great example of this would be like if you have a damaged area in your skin, the cells that are damaged might release growth factors that affect the cells beside them to trigger them to undergo mitosis. So autocrines, paracrines, very important substances to understand, but they're not a part of this endocrine system. Okay, now, it may seem tedious to learn that hormones are made by different things, but they are. Hormone chemistry is important. If we say that something is amino acid based, think of amines making up peptides, making up proteins. These things are getting bigger and bigger. If you have an amino acid based hormone, then this guy is made of amino acids. It's protein. We also call this a water-soluble hormone. Interesting little fact, water-soluble versus lipid-soluble. Water-soluble usually means that the substances are polar and they can dissolve into water, right? Our next group of hormones that we say they're steroid-based, but also people call them lipid-soluble. So just be aware of that, meaning they're made of lipids, so they can only dissolve in lipids. Back to this first way that we make hormones. This is the number one way that we make hormones. Most of our hormones are amino acid based or water soluble, or you can call them peptide based or protein based, etc. They represent most of our hormones. And here is an example. Thyrotropin releasing hormone is an example. You're not going to really have to understand or name individual examples. It'll be a process of elimination. When you learn your steroid hormones, this is the second most abundant type of hormone, and you learn where those steroid-based hormones or lipid-based hormones are made, then you'll know automatically if it's not from those organs, then it's protein-based. Okay, if steroid-based, we take steroid, like this guy right here. Notice we have 4 interlocking carbon rings. This is a typical steroid, typical cholesterol molecule. Testosterone is going to look like this. Estrogen is going to look like this. Cortisol is going to look like this. They all look like this because they're based out of cholesterol. So if we're made from cholesterol, we're going to be made in 2 places in the body. If we're made from our gonads, the gonads are the testes and the ovaries. If a hormone comes from these guys right here, we automatically know it's lipid-soluble or steroid-based. And if it comes from the adrenal cortex. Now, there are the adrenal glands that we had on that first picture right here. Here are the adrenal glands. They sit right on top of the kidneys. If we were to look at those adrenal glands and cut them open, we would find out that the inside, it has an inside and an outside. The outside bark or the outside area is called the adrenal cortex. And we might as well consider the adrenal cortex a completely different organ than the inner part, which is called the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla. Medulla. So on this slide right here, notice we're only talking about this part, the outer part. We're not talking about this inner triangle. So more of the steroid-based hormones, if they come from the adrenal cortex, then they are actually lipid soluble. So let me see on here. Let's see here. I'm looking steroid. The only one I think I have is this guy right here. Okay, so those are adrenal cortex hormones, like, sorry, this guy. We do have testosterone made by the adrenal glands, but we call them androgens in that case. But some other examples of the adrenal cortex hormones will be cortisol and aldosterone. Aldosterone. Those guys are lipid soluble. We'll get into them later on. Now, there's a group called the icosanoids that are made from arachidonic acid. And these guys, it depends. You don't have to call these hormones, but there's no other place really to teach about these icosanoids, so they're brought into this endocrine chapter. Prostaglandins are secreted throughout the body to help basically with survival. Prostaglandins increase your blood pressure. They help with clotting. They can induce pain, and they cause uterine contractions and inflammation. So those are classified in this category. Would I call these hormones? Not as much, no. But this is the only place to learn them. Leukotrienes, they mediate inflammation, meaning they enhance inflammation. They start the process of inflammation, and you hear about leukotrienes, especially in people with asthma. So that's part of the immune response. Here's an example of a prostaglandin down here. I want you to focus on these two, the amino acid-based hormones and steroid-based hormones. For your survival, focus on those two. Now back to this amine versus peptides versus protein. Here, over here is this hormone right here is thyroid hormone. And it is a very small guy. It's considered an amine. But if you get a little bigger, then we call you a peptide. If we get really big, like this, then we're a protein. So just a small review back from that chemistry part of your life. Okay, now on the mechanism of hormone actions, how does a hormone work? Well, first of all, if I'm an endocrine organ and I release hormones, those hormones are going to go into the blood, and they're going to be, every single cell that you have in your body is going to be exposed to that hormone. But will that hormone affect every single body cell? No. It has to be a target cell. I can't stress this enough. That means if the hormone's shaped like this and the cell is like this, it has to have a receptor for that hormone to make a reaction in a cell. Say we have a cell over here and it has a receptor that's shaped like this. Well, this doesn't fit it. We have triangular. It's not going to do anything to this cell. So target cells are cells with receptors for that particular hormone. There are some hormones that affect a huge amount of cells in the body. For instance, thyroid hormone. Most of your cells in your body have receptors for thyroid hormone. And then there's some other hormones that are very, and like insulin. Insulin's going to target a bunch of different cells. But then there's some very specific hormones that have very few target cells in the body, and we'll discover this as we go along. Now, pretty much in the most boring way we can talk about how hormones affect their target cells, we could say that these hormones affect the plasma membrane permeability. They cause channels to open or close and allow things to come in and out of the cell. Or they cause the cell to make some proteins or regulatory molecules that help the cell do its daily job. They may activate or deactivate enzymes inside of the target cell. They might cause the target cell to actually secrete something. There are some hormones that go to endocrine organs and tell those endocrine organs to secrete their hormone. Or they might stimulate mitosis, growth hormone. Growth hormone goes to the muscles and the bones and says, hey, grow. So this is the boring way to talk about what hormones do. We're going to look at each endocrine organ separately, and we're going to be very specific. These are non-specific ways that hormones affect the body. But with each hormone, I expect you to know how it affects its target cell. Okay, so this is just that thing. Here we have a hormone, the blood's going this way. And here we have hormone 1, and here we have hormone 2. Hormone 1 fits in this receptor, so it is a target cell of this hormone. Here's a different hormone. It does not fit there, so hormone 2 can't bind with the cell and can't cause any results whatsoever. Now, back to this water versus lipid soluble idea. That's a little messy. Remember that our protein-based hormones are water soluble. Our steroid-based hormones are lipid soluble. So we're changing up our terminology a little bit. But here we have this endocrine cell, and it's secreting a water-soluble hormone. How is that water-soluble hormone going to affect the target cell? Compared to over here, this is the cell it's going to affect. Now we have down here, we have another endocrine cell, and this endocrine cell is producing a lipid-soluble hormone. Both of these hormones go into the blood. And here, watch this hormone. It's going to go out and affect this cell. But notice that for our water-soluble hormones, the target cells must have the hormone receptor in the plasma membrane. Hormone receptor in plasma membrane. It's so hard to write on here. So notice that this water-soluble hormone that's made of proteins goes in. It can't go inside the cell, so it must dock on this membrane-bound receptor. However, when we have an endocrine cell down here and it's making lipid-soluble hormones, and those lipid-soluble hormones are going in here, these lipid-soluble hormones, first of all, must be bound. The lipid-soluble hormones are usually bound to protein carriers in the blood. So you'll see that in this illustration. But when they get to the tissues, they're released from that protein carrier. And look how this lipid-soluble hormone can go directly into the cell nucleus. Well, that's where the DNA is. That's a big deal. Here we have DNA in here, but this hormone can't go in and directly attach to it. Normally what happens with a lipid-soluble, water-soluble have to dock on the outside because they can't enter the cell. The lipid-soluble go into the cell and they dock on receptors, and then they're going to directly turn on genes in the DNA. And so there's a difference in this mechanism of action. What we call this water-soluble hormone docking on the outside, because it can't enter, it must trigger a cascade of events that are going to occur in the cell. And we call this mechanism of action up here, the water-soluble hormones being released and affecting their target cells, we call that a second messenger system. Because, spoiler alert, we're going to need a second messenger inside of this cell to make something happen. The lipid-soluble hormones, when they're actually released and they go into the blood, they go directly into the DNA, and you know your DNA molecule is composed of genes, and these lipid-soluble hormones can turn on genes, and so we call this mechanism of action, this endocrine cell releasing lipid hormones that go directly into the DNA, we call this direct gene activation. The difference in how the hormones work. Wonder if she's going to ask me on the test the difference between second messenger hormones and direct gene activation hormones. Yes, I am. And it all has to do with their chemistry. Remember that if you're lipid soluble, the plasma membrane is made of lipids. So it's super easy to go through you. The nuclear membrane is made of lipids and it has pores. So it's super easy to go through you. But if you're protein or water soluble, you can't go through this impenetrable barrier unless there is a protein there to allow you to either dock to it or go through. Okay, this is more explanation of this down here. So here we have direct gene activation. We have these lipid-soluble hormones that can go right through the phospholipid bilayer. They can go through this nuclear pore. And look where the target is. The receptor for the hormone is usually just floating free. Time to pause, and I'll start over because sometimes I get too excited about what I'm teaching. And I just wish it would allow me to pause. Okay, what you can't see is that it's snowing big time outside, and it's very exciting to me. And so I'm getting distracted easily. Okay, back to this mechanism of action. If you're lipid soluble, if you are made of a lipid, you can go right through this phospholipid bilayer and go into the nucleus. Here's our DNA molecule, and it's made of genes. I don't know why I'm not being able to draw. It's made of genes, this guy is. But the hormone still, even though it can go directly to the DNA, has to attach to a receptor. So here's a protein receptor that then attaches, this hormone receptor complex attaches to the DNA molecule, and it's going to turn on a gene. And when we turn on a gene, what we're going to do is we're going to go through this process of transcription and translation. Remember that all your genes code for certain proteins that your cell's going to make, or RNA molecules, but that's beside the point. If we turn on this gene, what we have to do is we have to make a copy of the gene. DNA never leaves the nucleus, and so we need an RNA molecule to do that. This process right here of making a copy of the gene is called transcription. Like you're transcribing. I'm talking, you're writing it down right now, you're transcribing. When we make a copy of that DNA gene, it's called transcription, and we copy it to a molecule called messenger RNA, which goes out into the cytoplasm to the site of the ribosomes. And if you'll recall, ribosomes make protein. So this is a weird picture, but as this messenger RNA molecule feeds itself through ribosomes, these are 2 ribosomes, then each ribosome makes a protein. And so when we're actually making a protein, that's called translation. So it's that central dogma of biology, transcription and translation. We transcribe a copy of a gene onto a messenger RNA molecule, which goes out to the ribosome that makes the proteins. Sort of important stuff. So what kind of hormones are lipid soluble? If you'll recall, the ones from the gonads, so that would be like estrogen and testosterone, and the ones from the adrenal cortex, that outer part, which would be the androgens, cortisol, and aldosterone. And then this is a weird one, thyroid hormone. It uses this mechanism of action, although it is classified as an amine. So that is a very strange thing. This is an outlier. Pretty much you can say if you're lipid soluble, you use direct gene activation. If you're protein based, you use second messenger systems, but we can't say that about thyroid hormone. So be aware of that. Okay, when it comes to second messenger systems, this is a very simplified version of what a second messenger system is. We have water-soluble hormones that use this second messenger systems, and there are 2 main ones that we use. There are more second messenger systems than this, but these guys have been studied the most. The first second messenger system type is called cyclic AMP. It is a cyclic AMP second messenger system. The PIP2 calcium signaling mechanism, we'll talk about that too. But in a nutshell, here is how second messengers work. Here's a protein. It's our first messenger. It's a protein-based hormone, a water-soluble hormone. It docks on a membrane-bound receptor, a hormone receptor, and it's going to activate a G complex, a G protein complex that is going to go to this little interesting little effector enzyme, and this enzyme is going to break ATP into another molecule, and it's going to activate these guys. We have all these inactive protein kinases in our cells, and when we activate them, something happens. Now, what happens? It depends on the protein. So in a nutshell, in this example, this first messenger is the hormone. The second messenger is this molecule right here, the CAMP molecule that we're going to make. I wish this picture were a little more general. Well, we basically have a first messenger, can't get into the cell, but the second messenger is in the cell and it's going to make something happen. So let's look at a little more detailed version of this. In this CAMP second messenger system, we have the first messenger that binds with our receptor molecule. And when it does that, what it does is it activates this G protein, GDP, guanosine diphosphate. You might be used to ATP, which is our energy molecule in our cells, adenosine triphosphate. When it breaks down, recall that it releases ADP and an inorganic phosphate group. So adenosine triphosphate to adenosine diphosphate. Well, this is also a form of energy, GDP. It just doesn't have that adenosine in front of it. It has guanosine. And so when we activate this G protein, it's activated and it will literally cruise like a little motorboat along the underside of the plasma membrane until it finds an effector enzyme. And in this case, our effector enzyme is called adenylate cyclase. And what this guy does is it takes this ATP, and ATP, if we want to draw it like this, here's the adenosine part, and then it has 3 phosphate groups attached to it. Phosphate, phosphate, phosphate. Well, like I did up here, if I break down ATP, we're removing 1 phosphate, and so we're going to have adenosine diphosphate. There's the adenosine, 2 phosphates, and this inorganic phosphate out here, we're going to release energy. If we want to make a CAMP molecule, cyclic AMP, that's what that stands for, cyclic adenosine monophosphate, all we have to do is instead of clipping it here, we clip this molecule here. Then we have adenosine and 1 phosphate group. That is adenosine monophosphate, and it turns to be a cyclic molecule, and so that's why we get this CAMP. Here's our second messenger right here, the CAMP molecule. It's going to activate protein kinases. Here we have inactive protein kinases. They're going to be activated and something happens in the cell. What happens? Well, it depends on the protein. You definitely do not have to know the difference between hormones that use this messenger system according to the PIP calcium cycle. Like you don't have to know if glucagon is a protein-based hormone. It uses a second messenger system. You don't have to know, does it use the cyclic AMP messenger system or the PIP2 calcium? You don't have to know that. But what would happen with glucagon? We know from first semester, if glucagon is released by the pancreas and it goes to the liver and it binds here, then when I say these inactive protein kinases are going to be activated, that something's going to happen, well, you already know what glucagon does to liver cells. Glucagon docks on the liver cells, and it tells the liver cells to break down glycogen to release glucose. So it does glycogenolysis. So that would be what those active protein kinases lead to, glycogenolysis. If we're talking about parathyroid hormone, you already know from first semester, and we're going to cover that again in this semester, both of these. But parathyroid hormone is going to increase blood calcium levels. And how does it do that? By targeting osteoclast. So when that PTH binds here and it activates these inactive protein kinases, it's going to activate those osteoclasts to break down the bone and release calcium into the blood. So 2 little things worth mentioning. Cascade effect. The cascade effect means there's a huge amplification. A little bit of hormone goes a long, long way. If we have 1 hormone that's being made here, we have a huge amount of protein kinases that are being activated, and then we have a huge result. So the cascade effect tends to be, well, we're just going to magnify. A little bit of hormone goes a long way. Now, because of that, hormone is very reactive. Because of this cascade effect, we're going to have an enzyme that breaks down our second messenger. And in this particular second messenger system, it's going to be phosphodiesterase. This is the enzyme that breaks down CAMP to shut this system off so the hormone doesn't last forever, or the effect of the hormone does not last forever, which is a good thing. I'm trying to pause. I needed a break to watch the snow. Okay, here's our first second messenger system. Now we're going to move on to the second messenger system. And I want you to not get overwhelmed by this information. There's too much information in this chapter for you to remember every single detail about this. If you don't know your second messenger systems, you can look them up in the future if you need them for reference. But here's the most easy way to remember this. We're going to have a hormone receptor. We have the hormone, which is the first messenger. It docks in the receptor. A G protein takes the message to an effector enzyme. So this is called the effector enzyme. That's a general. Sometimes it's effector enzyme. Sometimes it's easier to learn the specifics, and sometimes it's just easy to learn the generalities. But the effector enzyme is what makes this second messenger and activates protein kinases. Let's look at our second messenger system, which is this calcium messenger system. So here we have a hormone, and it docks on this receptor, and we have this G protein. We should just start right here. The hormone docks on the receptor, and likewise, we have this G protein that's going to be activated when it's got a little energy molecule on it. When it goes over here and attaches to the effector enzyme, which in this case is phospholipase C. And what phospholipase C does is it breaks this molecule that's attached to it. PIP2 is all you need to know, but phosphatidyl inositol biphosphate is cleaved into DAG, diacylglycerol. Hope I said that right. And inositol triphosphate. Now, the diacylglycerol is going to be an actual second messenger, because look how it's taking these inactive protein kinases and activating them. So something's going to happen in the cell. So in this second messenger system, diacylglycerol, that is our second messenger system, but also this inositol triphosphate goes to the endoplasmic reticulum and causes calcium to be released. So calcium is also a second messenger, because calcium will bind with calmodulin and it will trigger a response. So we have two second messengers in this system. Why do you have to learn this? Because we know it. And one day you might go into pharmacology, and that would be really nice for you to know where to look this information up or study your second messenger systems. Don't say no one ever taught you second messenger systems. In the grand scheme of endocrine system, this is not, the details, it's not important. You have water-soluble hormones that use second messenger systems to affect the cell. You have lipid-soluble hormones that use direct gene activation. So don't get overwhelmed by the details. I know you're probably vomiting in your mouth already. Okay, some more generalities. Cellular response to hormone levels. Say you have way too much hormone and your cells are like, I'm done. Stop. I'm done. I'm tired. What they'll do is this thing called downregulation. You get rid of receptors because there's too much of the hormone out there. Your cells become desensitized to that amount of hormone. This can happen for a variety of reasons. How about insulin resistance? That could be one. Or what if you have very little hormone? Well, then your cells will want to grab as much as that hormone as possible. And of course, in this case, we're definitely talking about the water-soluble hormones, but we'll do something called upregulation. Look at the amount of receptors we have on this downregulated cell on the left. I'm having a glitch here. Look at the amount of receptors. When we have too much hormone, when we don't have enough hormone, look how we upregulate to try to grab any bit of hormone that we can. So those are two different cellular responses when we have regular amounts of hormone in the body. When it comes to the onset, duration, and half-life of hormones are circulate free, or they, let me send my sister to a voicemail. She's calling. When hormones will circulate free in the blood, or they're bound to a protein. If they are steroid-based or lipid-based, or thyroid, now remember this is our outlier, they need carriers to go through the blood. The protein-based don't need carriers. The half-life of a hormone is the amount of time it takes for the blood level of the hormone to decrease in half. So let's say we have 100 micrograms, which is a huge amount of hormone in the blood and pretend like the endocrine organ doesn't release any more hormones. We just have this 100 micrograms in the blood, and it takes 5 days to break down to 50 micrograms. Well, that's good. That means our half-life is 5 days, right? Because we have half the amount later on. That's what half-life is. And some hormones last a lot longer than others in the body. And sometimes on about the onset, if a hormone is released, is it going to cause an immediate reaction or is it going to take days? Usually hormones react on the days on that side of things. However, have you ever had an adrenaline rush or an epinephrine rush? You know, you get scared, epinephrine is released, your sympathetic nervous system is already engaged. So that's an immediate response. But if you get really scared and you release epinephrine, that's an immediate response. That is salting the sympathetic nervous system, give it a little more flavor and a little more oomph. Duration. How long do hormones affect cells? Well, they could affect cells for only seconds or to hours, believe it or not. So you have this constant making of hormones to run the human body. Yeah, let's see if we have anything else left in this. Oh, the permissiveness. Take a deep breath. We need an intermission. I provided intermissions on the website for you, so you could just stop and look at something else for a little while, have a snack. Okay. Hormone interactions. Hormones interact with one another, and if they interact, if one hormone needs the permission of another to do its job, then we call that permissiveness. An example is thyroid hormone and growth hormone. As we're growing, growth hormone really needs the proper amount of thyroid hormone to cause your muscles and your bones to grow. So if you end up not growing as much as you should, it could be lack of growth hormone or it could be lack of thyroid hormone, one of the two. If hormones act synergistically, if synergism is in play, when two hormones come together, they cause an amplified effect, like all the hyperglycemic hormones. Now, this term hyperglycemic, this means too much sugar in the blood. If I say hyperglycemia, that means you've got too much sugar in your blood, too much blood glucose levels. If I say hypoglycemia, you have low blood sugar levels. But when we use this term talking about hormones, when we say a hyperglycemic hormone, this is a hormone that increases blood glucose levels. If we say it's a hypoglycemic hormone, it's a hormone that lowers blood glucose levels. We only have one hypoglycemic hormone, and that's insulin. You know that insulin lowers your blood glucose levels, so we would classify that as a hypoglycemic hormone. So on the hyperglycemic hormones, say we have the release of epinephrine, that will increase blood glucose levels. You don't know that yet, but it will. And say we have the release of glucagon at the same time. Bam, more blood glucose right off the effect, right off. Now, if we have hormones that affect antagonistically or work antagonistically to one another, that means the two hormones are working against each other. If we have a hyperglycemic hormone, that's one that raises blood glucose levels being released at the same time as a hypoglycemic hormone. Why would we do this? Say we have epinephrine being released and insulin being released. Epinephrine increases blood glucose levels, insulin lowers it, and so there's a meeting in the middle. So their antagonism does work. And these are the little pictures. Oh, look, this hormone gives this hormone permission to affect this target cell. Here we have two hormones that cause an amplified effect. So we'll just say affect this hormone. Here we have a positive and a negative effect, so this cell will have no reaction whatsoever, ever. Those are hormone interactions. Yeah, I'm going to have to pause and look at the snow for a little bit because I don't need to lose my energy now. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you all. When my sister was calling, she wanted to know if I wanted to go to Walmart to get groceries because it's snowing. Like, yeah, I'm in, so I have to finish this lecture. Let's do it. Okay, hormone stimulus release. What causes an endocrine cell to release its hormone. Well, it's going to be very specific per hormone, but we have these three main types of stimuli. And this is just ways to categorize it on a very general level. We have humoral stimuli, we have neural stimuli, and we have hormonal stimuli. So the neural stimulus is the easiest to do. Here we have a neuron, hence the name neural stimulus, and it releases a neurotransmitter, and that causes the release of the endocrine cell hormone. Here's the endocrine cell. I like to say an action potential comes down. This neuron zaps the cell, and it releases its hormone. It's kind of shocking. I know. Hormonal stimulus. What if this here, we'll start with the anterior pituitary. What if this anterior pituitary releases this hormone, and it causes this cell to release its hormone? Now you have to be a second endocrine cell to do this, because this is the hormonal stimulus right here. So pretend like this cell is in the ovaries, and it's going to release estrogen. Well, then we have this hormone released up here that goes to the blood to tell this endocrine cell to release the estrogen. This is the hormonal stimulus that causes this endocrine cell to release its hormone. Hormones causing the release of other hormones. If we have a hormone that acts on another endocrine cell, not a regular body cell, if we have a hormone that affects an endocrine cell and tells it to release its hormone, we call those tropic hormones. Tropic means to act upon, but you'll also see the word tropin at the end of some hormone names. If you see the name tropin at the end of a hormone name, you know that that hormone is going to go and affect another endocrine organ. It's a little cheat. Okay, so we have a neural stimulus. Here's the endocrine organ, endocrine cell. It's zapped with an action potential, and that causes the release. Hormonal, here we have the endocrine cell. A hormone tells it to release its hormone. When it comes to humoral, humors, the body humors are just, well, anything that's not neural and hormonal. So a humoral response may be, for instance, here's low blood calcium levels. Here's the calcium in the blood, and the calcium doesn't go out and affect the endocrine cell, but the endocrine cell knows that blood calcium levels are dropping, so it releases its hormone. And so calcium, is calcium a hormone? No. Is calcium a nervous stimulus? No. So that leaves it as a humoral. Another example, and in this case, if we have low blood calcium levels and it releases a hormone, this is going to be the parathyroid gland, and it's going to be releasing PTH. Another example is if you have low blood glucose levels, and then the pancreas releases glucagon. Or if you have high blood glucose levels, glucose is not a hormone, it's not a neural stimulus, that would cause the pancreas to release, or I said high that time. If you have high blood glucose levels, then the pancreas is going to release insulin to make those levels go down. So here are some of the examples of humoral stimuli. Insulin is under humoral control. Parathyroid control. In this insulin, this would be blood glucose levels going up. That's the trigger. For parathyroid hormone, if blood calcium levels go down, that's the trigger. Calcitonin. If calcitonin is going to be released by the thyroid, if blood calcium levels go up, calcitonin would be released. And then the adrenal cortex hormones, most of them are hormonally controlled. We're going to find out that. But there are some times when the adrenal cortex will release because of high potassium levels. That might be an example of when aldosterone might be released. And so think of these. This is going to be a side note, the adrenal cortex. When it comes to the hormones that are neurally controlled, you're an endocrine organ, and you're not going to release your hormone unless you're zapped by a neuron, by an action potential. So that would be our adrenal medulla. Remember, we have an outer adrenal cortex right out here. This is the medulla. Think of the sympathetic nervous system coming right in and zapping that medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are going to be emergency hormones. Also, we talked about some of these things last semester with the nervous system and with fight or flight, but we did not talk about the pituitary gland. There's a stalk called the infundibulum coming down from the hypothalamus, and here's the pituitary. We've mentioned several times an anterior pituitary, but in the posterior pituitary, we're going to have the neurohypophyseal hormones. They're actually made up here in the hypothalamus, and then they're just, I can do this. Then they're just stored in this posterior pituitary. And this is another name for the posterior pituitary. The neurohypophyseal hormones. It stores oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. So this is ADH. So if we want these guys released, we have to send an action potential that zaps the posterior pituitary to cause the release of those individual hormones. And insulin. Now, I've already said insulin was under humoral control because you know that. When you have high blood glucose levels, insulin is released. That triggers the release of insulin. So clearly there is a humoral stimulus. However, it can also be classified as neurally controlled hormone because the parasympathetic fibers, remember, the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest system. The main cranial nerve 10, vagus nerve that comes down and innervates the organs with parasympathetic fibers is our vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, carries parasympathetic fibers. And when the vagus nerve stimulates the pancreas, it will also release insulin. You can pretend like you don't know that one, but I am a stickler for detail. Hormonal control. Which endocrine glands are controlled by hormones? And most of the hormones are coming from the anterior pituitary. All the hypophyseal, I can do this, hypophyseal hormones, the anterior pituitary are controlled by hormones. What hormones? It's not listed in this picture, but the hypothalamus sends down via hypothalamus these things called releasing hormones that cause the anterior pituitary to release its hormones. And then the gonadal hormones, that would be your ovaries and testes. If this is an ovary, then this tropic hormone would be coming from the anterior pituitary, telling the ovary to release estrogen. Or if this is a testis, telling the interstitial cells of the testes to release testosterone. Thyroid hormone is under hormonal control. If this is the thyroid gland, we have cells in it, then we're going to release a tropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, to cause the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone. And then the adrenal cortex. So if this cell is in the adrenal cortex, that outer part, then all of these cells are also considered under hormonal control. I did list the adrenal cortex back here under humoral control because of potassium. But for the most part, if you want to just abbreviate your life, say that the adrenal cortex hormones are released via hormonal control. Okay, I'm going to take another deep breath. I can't imagine if anybody watches this straight through because I can't speak it straight through. Okay, this really is our last slide for this module, for this beginning introduction to the endocrine system before we get specific with the actual hormones. Okay, how do we control hormones? You know that normally with homeostasis, and we have homeostasis, we are keeping a variable within a certain range, a narrow defined range, right? And if that variable bounces back and forth like this between the range, it's homeostasis, that is through something called negative feedback. On this side, we're going to have negative feedback. So we expect our hormone levels to be like this. They're going up and they're going down, and they're going up. And that's negative feedback because the body's going to take steps to make sure that we don't go outside of this range. or on this side outside of this range. If we have something, most all things in the body, most all variables are controlled through negative feedback. The homeostasis of calcium is managed through negative feedback. The homeostasis of thyroid hormone is affected, I mean, it's controlled by negative feedback. But this thing called positive feedback over here can't happen for a long time. Instead of keeping a variable inside of a range, we trigger it and it increases and increases and increases until it just can't do it anymore. So there are very few instances of homeostasis in the human body that go through positive homeostasis or positive feedback to maintain homeostasis. Childbirth is going to be one of them. And so when we did, back in the first semester of this course, positive feedback, childbirth was an example, blood clotting was an example, and we brought, I told you about how oxytocin causes the uterus to contract more and more and more violently until you actually produce a child or give birth to a child. So an example of a hormone that's managed through positive feedback would be oxytocin. And here's the simple oxytocin. Most all hormones are managed this way through negative feedback. Here's how it goes. We have the secretion of a hormone, and that hormone will go back and feed onto whatever triggered it to be released and say, there's enough hormone in the blood, we don't need you anymore. This is very generic. As we go through, each hormone will go through the negative feedback of why it's released. When it comes to positive feedback, we have the secretion of, in this case, a hormone. And this endocrine organ is secreting another hormone. And it's the hormone that feeds back. And the more hormone you have, the more we keep on going. And so we have this situation here. More hormones being produced, more hormone, more hormone, more hormone, until we can't do this any longer. Most all of your hormones are controlled through negative feedback. That's what prevents them from being released. But when we talk about oxytocin, we will give positive feedback another look. All right, we made it through the first lecture of the endocrine system.